Hi, Shin. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks to everyone for being here. I'm very excited to sit. Really big crowd, also. Wow. I'm very excited to be talking today. Briefly, obviously, this is a very short 20 minutes kind of talk, and then with Q&A, hopefully we can go more in depth into research process. So, as an artist, I've always been interested in this intersection of art, technology, and activism, as well as history, but with a very specific focus on this term that I have developed since 2016 called digital colonialism, where I'm thinking through technological advancement and possibilities and limitations within the lens of colonial dominant power structures, and kind of how those power structures affect the global South and ways in which that we at this very moment in our lives, also living mostly in the global North, kind of like relate and connect to technology, and what does it mean to then think about critical thinking of technology. So with that, my work is also very research based. It's very kind of narrative based. It's about finding stories and using storytelling as this tool that allows for reimagining and reframing of different topics and concepts. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Okay. I want to specifically today talk about a body of work that was heavily research based, that it took me 5 years to work on because it has many aspects and layers and components to it, called She Who Sees the Unknown. Um, and the reason I chose this is because I also kind of want to show you how you can think about long-term projects as something that can be valuable. In school systems, as you all know, you're asked to do small assignments that are kind of like due in like 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then you work on something, you work on a topic, and then you move on to the next thing, right? And kind of if you have the opportunity once you're out of a school to be able to actually focus more in depth on a topic or a concept that you can really think through from multiple various possibilities with, the value of that practice, the value of also taking time to work on something, to not get super like distracted with this very fast-paced idea of like having to produce work to push it just out there. Um, and I think this is a really good example of really taking your time with a body of work. So She Who Sees the Unknown is a work that in it I'm looking at the history, the ancient specific Islamic history of monstrous female slash queer figures in manuscripts, and a lot of them underrepresented or forgotten stories from the Middle East and North Africa. Um, and with this, I was interested in finding these stories that are not known as much, or finding figures that are known as much, and then connecting their stories, their power, because these are like monstrous kind of like figures. I wanted to kind of like use their power, their monstrosity as a way to then connect them to different stories in relationship to, environmental degradation, in relationship to patriarchy, to xenophobia, and etc., etc. So here I first like started to get interested in this concept of jinn. If anyone here might be from the Middle East, or even different parts of Africa, specifically also like West Africa, you might know this term. So jinn are known as these human monsters axis, basically figures that are known as being, made from smokeless fire. They can be good or bad. And they can also, I mean, the very stereotypical version of them is, or the story you might know is the genie in Aladdin, right? Like that's where it comes from. But the jinn are also like very honored and respected within like Islamic cultures or Islamicate cultures. So you have daily stories about them and how you can be possessed by them, or you can use their power to possess other people and situations. So here I'm thinking about jinn as this figure that I'm like expanding on thinking about. With this body of work, something I always do within my creative process is to find different frameworks. Sometimes I look at other people's frameworks and then use those as a way to kind of come up with like a bigger way of understanding, some aspects of my project. Sometimes I come up with my own terms. So here I like make this term called refiguring or refiguration, which for me is about activation and preservation. It's an act of going back and retrieving the past. How can we reimagine our kind of present and future through reimagining the past? So refiguring for me is also a ficto or like fictional feminist and activist practice that reflects on the effects of historical and digital colonialism and other forms of oppression and catastrophe. In this sense, She Who Sees the Unknown is a practice of refiguring forgotten figures and resituating their histories. So if I go here and show you the website for She Who Sees the Unknown, there are 5 selected figures. There are 5 main figures that I worked on. Each of these figures have their own storyline, have their own installation, and their storyline are in the form of whether like a video that has like narration in it, or a VR piece that also has storytelling that I'm collaborating with my mom. I will talk about that one in a second. Or it's in a form of like a shorter animation. So I was kind of imagining each of these figures having their own research, having their own kind of space, like a shrine-like space that you enter an exhibition space, and then you can build your own connection and interaction with each of these figures. So if you look at here, this is, for example, a figure, her name is Homa or Homma in Arabic, meaning fever. So she's a jinn that brings fever into human body when she possesses humans. And then I was thinking about heat and kind of human bodies, but also extending that to the heating of the planet, and connecting this to the stories of kind of colonial ways that environmental crisis has been thought through and is being, discussed, and ways of bringing justice kind of to conversations around environmental crisis. If I go back here, you can see that, with this, I like to include resources about like what I'm reading, how am I like coming up with these ideas. I want to show you, before I go into a couple of figures that I want to dig a little bit deeper into, I also want to show you how I organize my folders. I think I have to, I don't know if I shared it as a full screen. Let me reshare 1 second, sorry. I did share my entire screen, but let's see. For some reason, it doesn't let me bring up the folder. I guess I have to come here. Sorry, 1 sec. Okay, so this is the folder. So I want to show you, for example, at the very beginning of this body of work, I was just kind of going crazy for like days and days, obsessing over any kind of figures I could find. So I was like reading different stories, like looking through hundreds of like PDF files, books, material. I was going to different libraries. I was looking at digital libraries, just trying to figure out like what are the stories, what are the figures, what are the manuscripts that are out there that kind of like are showing these like figures of anything that is considered a monstrous figure that is, female or queer in terms of like looking genderless. And then from that, I like, you know, if, I mean, like if I show you, I was just gathering these like material from the internet here, or sometimes I would find PDF files and I would extract like the images from it. And then I ended up, you know, selecting at the very end, as I showed you, 5. But this process of gathering hundreds and hundreds of these like images and names ended up in an archive that I will also show you. Kind of, I'm trying to show you how to start. You start kind of like, you can start like big, like really trying to dig into what is out there and then slowly narrow it down to what is important to you, right? So with this, the reason I chose this like specifically like 5 figures was because they were the figures that for me kind of like their stories was the most interesting or the most important. They were the figures that I felt like there was room to tell a story about them. And if I also show you the all important material here, there is, these are all the readings, all the things that I was just gathering that was in one way or another connected to the concepts that I was like looking at. For example, when I was working on MoMa, which, as I said, was about environmental degradation, I was like reading Donna Haraway. I was reading, you know, this zombie manifesto. I was reading a lot of Haraway, actually, as you can see here, but I was reading Rosie Braidotti. So, and the way I was gathering this material also was a mix of just searching myself and also asking around, like if I knew someone who I knew their research, a friend who their research was on specifically justice and environmental crisis, I would like reach out to them. Or believe me, like I found so much stuff through asking on Twitter and like people just like responding and like sending me different like material or sharing different resources. So it was a mix of a lot of visual gathering, material gathering, and also a lot of like reading and conceptual development. All right, now I think I have to like stop it and go back to this. Sorry, I'm gonna come back here. How much time do I have? 5 minutes?
Yes.
Okay.
It's okay to go over like a minute or 2.
Okay. So here I'm gonna show you, share this. Okay. So you know, the story, I want to show you like one more example of one of the figures, for example, which is the laughing snake. And this one was, you know, a story I found in one of these manuscripts. And her story is about a snake that is, you know, monstrous. She's very powerful. The storyline is that she's going to different towns and cities and killing people and winning all the wars, and no one can stop her until someone comes and says that the only way to stop her is to hold a mirror in front of her. And when a mirror is held in front of her, as you can see here in these manuscripts, these like men holding a mirror, when she sees her reflection, she laughs for days and nights until she dies from laughter. So within these concepts that I was developing, obviously I didn't want the laughter or her death to be a point of like weakness, because I was like, there's so much power into this storyline. And so I started to read, you know, about kind of different stories from Medusa, that has that idea of mirror. You might have heard of Medusa, who is looking at the mirror, but then, but also like whenever she, like her stare can turn people into stone, to the different storylines of just feminist studies or queer studies in which, in different storylines, women take ownership of their own bodies, right? Here, the self-destruction, her laughter, her death is a way of taking ownership of her body. So I built a whole sculpture. These are all 3D printed, and developed a hypertext narrative, which is commissioned by the Whitney Museum, as a way to connect her storyline to experiences of sexual harassment and street harassment growing up in Iran. This is a time that the Me Too campaign was happening, and there was like a lot of conversations around this stuff, but I felt like it was mostly focused on white women and their experiences, and very little compared to how much that was amplified. Very little about women in other countries outside, especially of the US or Europe. So feel free to check these out later. I'm just giving you a hint of like a little bit of stuff, but to come to this ending, I then decided that because the research aspect of this project was so intense and there was like so much material and time that I had put into gathering these manuscripts that are rare, these stuff were not just like out there in like one place, and I felt like I really wanted to build an archive that would bring all of them together into one place. And then this is another thing, collaborate. If you're doing stuff and then there is a point where you feel like you want to do something but you are not going to be the specialist to do it alone, collaborate with people, ask people to like work with you on a project. Here I was collaborating with a historian based in Iran, who specifically is like an Islamic historian, and she was helping me with listing all these manuscripts that I was like finding, because as I said, a lot of them, maybe they were like in Morgan Library in New York, or they were like in a library in Iran or Iraq, but there was not kind of organized listing and bringing information about them in one place. So I worked with her as a way to build that aspect of the project. So another part of this archive, which is really important to me, is that it's in 3 languages, so Farsi, Arabic, and English, but also because at this time I was doing a lot of work on thinking about knowledge building, knowledge production, but at the same time, as I said, this concept of digital colonialism, so how to also protect knowledge, right? How to share knowledge while protecting knowledge, these ideas around, for example, when you think about open source, is open source inherently good, right? The answer is no, because depends on when you live in a time of, imperialism and colonial power structures and systems. We have to think about what does it mean to share certain information on a certain platform. How do we take control and ownership of our cultures and our stories and our narratives, and who has the authority to decide, what kind of information should go where, and for like how long it should stay on a place. So with this, if you know English, you can have access to the first layer of the archive. So if I like click on here and go, there is like these image galleries, but also you can download the whole PDF of the manuscript. So you can click here and have access to different material that are on there as a first layer. But then to get into the second, third, and fourth layer of the archive, you have to know Farsi or Arabic, because then you're asked to put in what I call a set of cultural codes, which are the combination of alphabets and numbers, as a way to get into the second, third, and fourth layer of the archive. And the reason as I said, the reason I was interested in this was that I was kind of like really trying to see, experiment with these ideas of like, when we think about decolonizing spaces or material, like what does it mean? How can we practice it? Who do I carry this knowledge to go to? All this material that I shared, who do I want to have access to it? Because I want people to build on this archive. I want people to expand on these stories and material, but at the same time, I wanted to kind of be able to share it with a community that mattered to me, to then do whatever they want with this material. So with that, I'm gonna stop here, and we can kind of like maybe like hopefully move into Q&A. But I think if I can focus to like put in this archive, I cannot like read it as I'm talking, but I will show it to you. Let me type it for a second. Okay, I see. Okay. So it kind of keeps going deeper and deeper. And one thing I also wanted to say that I forgot to say was that the process of gathering material was complicated a lot of time within Western institutions because they wouldn't give me access to a full manuscript. They wouldn't, for example, they would be like, oh, we can just give you the black and white version, or like there are this number of pages we can give you access to. Which the irony of it is that, I was like trying to build an archive on something that is from my culture and my country, these manuscripts that have been stolen and taken to these museums. And then they had control over how much of it I could or couldn't have access to. So I have to find multiple ways to go around it. Or if I didn't get access to it, that was one of the other reasons that I was like thinking about building this material. So this is, I think, perhaps can serve as a good example of you're thinking about your creative process as something that starts with research, then has this aspect of it that is, installation, what goes in a museum, in a white wall of a gallery. But then always, I think it's also important to think about how you might want to extend that, how you might want to go outside of the white walls of a gallery space. And then thinking about different ways to build a community around the research or the work that you're doing, that you can keep building and creating with other collectives and other people, which is, to me personally, very, very important.
Thank you so much. So for Cult Salon, we are going to take a very short break. And yeah, we have a lot of good questions for you. And I'm gonna hand popcorn to Suzanne and Shaki.
Hi. Yeah, so Shauki and I had a question. We're both Middle Eastern artists, and we loved how you used the knowledge of like Arabic or Persian script to kind of access the archive further. We thought that was really cool. And we were wondering how you choose to move through finding a balance of authenticity while also being mindful of potential colonial and oriental gazes when you're presenting your art.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for that super important question. I think that's always, whenever like you are from any other country, culture outside of the Eurocentric culture, and you're working in museums and spaces that are in then Europe or North America, then you're dealing with that back and forth question. And I think, actually, Ocean Vuong, you might know Ocean Vuong, who is a poet and a writer, talks about this often, which is that you just have to find what is your story and why you want to tell that story and who that story is for, and then the rest is not something you can control, or is also not something you need to control. Recently I was actually thinking about this because I was building an animation scene for a new film that I was working on, and then in that scene there is this astrolabe, so these like celestial or like astronomy and astrology instruments that this person is holding. And the way these instruments were practiced was they would take them in the desert. All these observatories were built in the desert because of the desert light and your access to the stars. So that was like a very common practice. And then I had to put this character in a desert space, and then I was like, does it like look like super like oriental? Because this person, I don't want to like be this like woman who's like wearing this Kurdish thing and is holding an astrolabe and is in a desert, and but then I was thinking that, the fact that I was thinking about that is actually the effect of that colonial gaze on my mind. The fact that this is how it was practiced, and I'm worried about recreating something in a way that it was actually practiced, because I am worried about how a colonial gaze might think about it, whereas the story I'm telling is what's important. Like within that story, what the context of that story is important. So I think it's about, to give you a short answer, is always about finding that balance and like understanding where the power is. If you are taking the power and embracing the power as a way to create something, then it doesn't matter. If you feel like you're rebuilding something again in a way that is adding something to the conversation, then it's not about worrying about the colonial gaze, because the colonial gaze will always be there. it's about also not shying away from, you know, aesthetics or elements or who we are or what are those things that we need to use to create the stories we want to create.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Matthias?
Yeah, hi, I'm Matthias. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your work. That was very, very interesting. I have a question that was shared by multiple people. So I tried to condense it into just one. But it was mostly about the medium that you use of like 3D work and using like 3D digital work as a medium. So how did you like end up like choosing this as like one of the mediums that you work with? And does this medium in particular has any specific characteristics that helps you communicate the message and the research that you did?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think about medium and any kind of technologies or tools as a vessel, right? So I am not a VR artist. I'm not a digital fabrication artist. I am an artist interested in different medium and tools, and I use them based on what the work requires, right? So you have to think with the work and then understand how you can do the best version of this with the best tool that is available to you. And again, if you can't, if I don't know how to like do coding for a VR, then work if you have the budget. This is after your school when you apply for grants and stuff, but work with someone, work with a team that can bring that to you. For example, with She Who Sees the Unknown, one of the figures is like the story is created in a VR space. And the reason I wanted it to be in a VR space is because it's about a jinn called Caboose, which is known to bring nightmare and to like at night, she sits on your chest and causes sleep paralysis and causes nightmare. So I wanted an experience that, you know, when you would wear the headset, you're lying down in an installation space that looks like a bedroom, and you lie down and you wear the headset and you really emerge into kind of like a dream-like space. And I feel like I could not have done that feeling that I wanted to convey and that experience with any other technology other than VR in a way that I wanted it to feel immersed into a space as you're lying down. So that's just one example, but this is how I always think about my work. So not beyond technology for technology's sake, to choose what makes sense for your work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much for your answer.
You're welcome.
Charlotte and Yuanning?
Hi, I'm Whitney, and thanks for sharing. And we have two questions. The first question is, when engaging with audience from different cultural backgrounds, how do you effectively convey this specific cultural narratives through practice? And the second question is, what learning did you apply from your multi-year-long research? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, the first question goes back a little bit to what I was already saying with the question that was asked about, you know, like what is the balance between making a work that is like not feeding into colonial gaze. I think coming from any cultural background, again, the fact that there is that much power for us to constantly like think about these things, I think that itself is the effect of colonial power on our mind, is that we have to always like worry about, okay, is the work I'm making like kind of like can cause this or cause some kind of miscommunication? How can I make a work that like speaks to an audience who doesn't know my culture, you know, or like the story behind that? Somewhere in the middle of my practice as an artist, I started to build these reading rooms that were like physical reading rooms that I would, you know, kind of show with different work. For example, if I was showing an installation of She Who Sees the Unknown, there would be a reading room with books and material and, you know, PDF files and images. So there was like an iPad with images. There was like a library with books. There was like files with like different articles that I had printed. And that was always in Farsi and Arabic and English, but kind of like allowing for people, if they're interested, to go there and dig deeper into, you know, my research, which is actually the prompt I'm going to give you today at the end of today's talk. But kind of, yeah, maybe like finding a way of like not feeling like you have to give everything or bring all the knowledge and information to someone so that they can connect to your work, but rather feeling a little bit ease in the work you're making, and then giving your audience the chance to dig deeper if they want to dig deeper, you know. Oh, wait.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
You're welcome. And there was like a second question that now I forgot. You asked something.
Yes. So the second question is, what learning did you apply from your multi-year long research? Yeah, that's the second one.
I think one of the things that I think I became like better and better at was how to combine personal storytelling with research material that are, you know, theories or like readings or like a concept that is kind of academic, like how to break that like boundary between those spaces. So being able to, for example, talk about war or like a bigger like collective experience, but then being able to connect that to my own personal storytelling. So that the way to build that balance, I think that was something that took a while, because I feel like sometimes research-based work can become boring or like too serious or too dry. So it was always important for me to find a way to break that and be able to connect with whoever who's seeing my work or experiencing my work in like a deeper personal level.
Thank you so much.
Hi, my name's Sarah. I have the next question if we have time for it. So you have several self-defined terms or concepts such as refiguring or digital colonialism. Could you expand upon what these terms mean to you and how it helps you in your work?
Your voice, I heard up to the concept of digital colonialism and refiguring, and then your voice is not coming out. Well, maybe your microphone.
Better?
Yes, better.
Sorry about that. Kind of loud in here. The question was, can you expand upon your self-defined terms such as like refiguring or digital colonialism, what these terms mean to you and how it helps you in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not just a practicing artist. Like that's not how I think about my work. My background, I did my undergrad studies in Iran, and that was in social sciences and media studies. And then I came to the art world for my grad. So I did like an MA and an MFA. And with that, I think it's kind of always been important for me to be a thinker at the same time that I'm a maker. So building these frameworks are about kind of like being able to exist in a space that is not just an art practice, that is studio art practice. And then that always has also affected the way that people have built on my work. You know, like after I developed this whole thing with refiguring, there were like 3 exhibitions called Refiguring, blah, blah, Refiguring with like some other name, you know, at the Whitney Museum. There was one at Pioneer Works that the curators used kind of the framework that I was coming up with as a way to build their own exhibition. They obviously credited me, but I think I like to be able to come up with things that, again, like once again, going back to what I was saying with the archive that other people can build on. Thank you.
And Christian?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
My question would be like, how do you see the relationship between traditional forms of art making and digital technology? I noticed that you work with both forms.
I couldn't hear your voice. Was it possible to type it? I don't know. Is it just my
I can type it in.
Okay, yeah, type it. I can't.
Also repeat it just because for the recording. So the question is, how do you see the relationship between traditional forms of art making and versus digital techniques in your work?
Once again, I would say that I love to build a balance. So this is why I love working on historical storytelling. And I'm not thinking about history as something that only belongs to the past or technology as something that belongs to the future, but a much more like non-binary relationship between these two. Because you can build histories for the future, and you can learn and like explore technologies of the past as a way to tell a story, for a history in the future, right? So these ideas can be shifted, but then I think there's always a lot of material there in the past that you can use as a way to build these kind of like back and forth in terms of like timing, but also to build on and to build with. And yeah, to me, a lot of time I feel like when I look at a lot of digital media based work or like art and technology based work, personally to me, I feel like it's either personal in a way that I feel like it stays just there, like it doesn't expand into some further collective experience, or it can just be like very wrapped up in this space of like digital art or art and technology. So for me, it's always been interesting to be able to, again, like break out of that narrative of like, oh, as a digital media artist, these are the topics you should be working on, and these are the ways your work should look like only, and then these are the ways you have to engage with these platforms. So that's why I kind of have always tried to like look for, yeah, whether topics or time frames or refigurations of all these ways of building and being, to break out of that.
That was incredibly fruitful, and I think the group is ready to hear the creative prompt whenever you want to share them.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I really hope we can do this one other time in real life so that I can actually see all of you as you ask your questions. But so let me show you this real quick. One sec. Okay. So the prompt I want to give you is whatever it is that you're working on, in terms of, the concepts or a project you're working on, a project you can see yourself being able to like really develop further, or like a topic that you can like work on for 1 or 2 years, let's say. I want you to think that you're building a reading room. These are just examples of some of the reading rooms I've built in different exhibitions. As I said, there are images on the wall, there's text, there's files, there's articles, there's books. So I want you to imagine you're building a reading room about this topic or this body of work that you're developing, with this idea that other people can come into that reading room and really learn deeply about that topic. And your reading room should include images, so visual material, and reading material. What would you put in that reading room? That's my prompt.
Thank you so much. That's really, really wonderful. And yeah, we're so fortunate to have you here. And please let us know when you visit New York City. We'd love to have you stop by.
Will do. Thank you all, and please stay in touch. Thanks so much for having me, Shin. And I really enjoyed talking to you. Thanks for your very smart, brilliant questions, and good luck. I want to know what you put in your reading room, so maybe send that to me.
Will do.